Welcome. We're here with Tim Collins. Tim, it's great to have you at the conference. Tell us what company you're with, a little bit about what you guys do.
Great, Mike. It's great to be here. I work at Elemental Advisors, and we've introduced a psychedelic medication-based ETF. So it's a diversified portfolio of companies that are involved in the development of clinical, pharmaceutical-grade treatments for mental illness.
Perfect. Okay, talk a little bit about the Enhanced Consciousness Index. What does this do? How does it determine what companies are in the ETF? What all goes into that?
The index is a screening mechanism primarily focused on North American and European stocks, and it attempts to identify companies that are involved in that space, and then it puts a series of constraints and parameters around that. So we're only looking for companies that support a certain liquidity and are eligible for inclusion in the basket. One of the interesting things we've done is we've completely tried to not exclude, but we don't search actively for cannabis-based investments. We think that is well-trod ground.
Sure.
There are probably 15 cannabis ETFs out there right now, and quite frankly, we're so excited by the developments in psychedelics that we don't think that the portfolio needs that exposure.
Got it. Okay, and when you look at the medical psychedelic trend as a whole, why should consumers be interested in this? What kind of societal trends are we seeing that are leading to this being a bigger and bigger deal?
Sure, that's a really good question, especially given as we come out of COVID, and what had been a big problem, mental health illness, is now a huge problem. Mm-hmm. The lockdown didn't help that situation. And I think that our thesis is that it is a large and growing problem, that existing therapies are inadequate, and that the initial results on the use of psychedelics are very promising.
That's great. Okay, and then when you look at the market for medicinal psychedelic drugs, how has it evolved over the years? It's still a burgeoning industry, but what kind of changes have we seen?
Yeah, the evolvement is actually pretty unique. It was widely studied and on the cusp of widespread acceptance up until the 1950s and 60s. Mm-hmm. It then became a Class 1 scheduled drug. So it's been illegal to use it or research it for the better part of the last 40 years. Starting kind of the mid-90s, an underground or backdoor research effort began, and it showed so much promise that now you're at the point where there are drugs being developed by a myriad of new companies, big pharma's involved, the private equity and IP pipeline is chock full of companies that are looking at these compounds, and that's, again, a reflection on kind of the lack of efficiency of the current treatments and the promise that they're finding in the clinical trials.
So when you're looking at psychedelic drugs treating mental illness, what are the specifics that go into making that happen? How do these help support and solve the problem?
Well, the interesting thing is that nobody really knows what the process is whereby psychedelics allow these changes to occur. What they do know is that there are receptors in the brain, and the psychedelic compounds cling to those receptors, and those receptors are commonly associated with happiness and bliss. The other interesting aspect of that is the durability of this. So in a traditional mental health treatment, you would be prescribed some fairly heavy drugs, and you would be expected to take those virtually for the rest of your life. Even if the symptoms go into remission, you have to stay on your meds.
Sure.
The psychedelics, the way it's been described and the way I find it most informative is it's almost like your brain is wired to react to stimuli in a certain manner, even if that's a destructive or a non-optimal outcome. Mm-hmm. So in times of stress or duress, you turn to alcohol or substance abuse. Mm-hmm. And it's kind of like the tracks through a snowy field. Mm-hmm. That's the route that the brain knows to take. Psychedelics are almost like a fresh fallen snow, and the brain maps a new track through that field, and one that doesn't have the suboptimal outcomes of the substance or the other side effects of the suboptimal choice. So in that respect, although the mechanism isn't known, it produces, in many cases, durable results from a very limited number of applications.
Got it. Okay, really interesting. And let's talk about, what can you tell us about one of the companies in the index that might be heavily involved in the medical psychedelic trend?
Sure. I'll give you a couple of examples. The first one I'll give you is just Johnson & Johnson. And I throw that out there because I think most people are surprised that Big Pharma has a footprint in this space. They've got a product that's aimed at treating depression, nasal spray product, and they've been marketing that for several years. I think then if you look at the spectrum, right? So there's a company called MindMed, which is a Canadian biotech company, and they're developing a number of different treatments for a range of mental illness, all and having very good success in the clinical trials, all based on psychedelics. So that's the development side of it. On the other end of the spectrum, you've got Compass Pathways, which has a number of clinics where they are more interested in the administration of the drugs. So these are given under very controlled situations where there are administrators and other professionals that are there to assist in the actual process. So that kind of covers from the development of the drugs to the administration, and then there's a whole range of, in between.
Sure, makes sense. Let's talk about PSYK in the exposure to cannabis sense. Do you have any cannabis exposure when it comes to that?
If there's any cannabis exposure, it's incidental. So, for instance, GW Pharma or Jazz Pharmaceutical, which just taken over, has an existing psychedelic research program. They also have some cannabis-based treatments. One is for childhood leukemia. So they're eligible for inclusion. But we're not screening looking for cannabis. We're looking for psychedelic.
Got it. Okay, and when you look at the thematic ETF space as a whole, there's a wide range of thematic ETFs available, right? Why do you think that the psychedelic space is so important?
Because the mental health crisis is so acute. It's a huge impact on the economy. The numbers of people that it affects are staggering. And so if you look at a lot of thematic ETFs, are kind of fads, and there are ETFs that have to do with what political party is in power, what search terms are. I don't think that they have the durability because I don't think that decisions are being made based on the outcomes of those that have such an impact on the economy.
Sure.
And I just gave you a couple of examples of the breadth of the companies that are in the basket. I think that an ETF is a good vehicle to present that exposure to investors, because to actually go and assemble that portfolio is probably beyond the means of most casual investors.
Absolutely. And I'm glad you actually mentioned that point, because if we're looking at this from an investor standpoint, where does this fit into building your portfolio or an existing portfolio with a psychedelic ETF?
Right. Obviously, I don't think this is your core holding, but I think that to the extent you're excited by the developments in it and you can see the potential of them, a small allocation of an equity portion of your portfolio is warranted.
Fantastic. Okay, closing question for you. Moving ahead here, we covered a lot of ground. This was extremely informative, so we really appreciate the insights. But looking ahead into the end of Q2, the rest of the year, where is the company going after this? Where's your focus going to lie?
We're still in some ways getting our footing. The Q2 and through the rest of this year will be an extension of the build-up of the marketing portion of our program. We're always on the eye out for new products, and we have a couple of products in the pipeline, which I can't really discuss right now. But our focus now is on promoting PSYK.
Amazing. Tim Collins, PSYK. A ton of information here. Thank you so much for joining us at the Psychedelic Capital Conference.
Thanks, Mike.